Well, hey, good morning, everybody. What we're going to be talking about today is our last teaching in a series called Mindset. And today's subject is kind of a big one, and it's a subject that doesn't sound very pleasant, but it is something that the Bible speaks about very often. It's called dying to self. Okay? And the idea is simply this. It's putting others ahead of ourselves, even when it's inconvenient. Y'all have heard me speak many, many times about how this is a church that gets it. Y'all have heard me say that? And so, I hope so. You'll hear me say it again if you haven't. And the reason that I talk about that, the reason that I am so proud to be a part of a church that gets it, is because I, along with many of the other paid staff, have been a part of or served in churches that don't get it. And probably some of you too. You've attended churches where you're like, why aren't we doing anything? Why aren't we doing what the Bible tells us to do? Why aren't we reaching out? And it's incredibly frustrating. And one of the things that made me realize how true this was, that not every church gets it, was quite honestly at the last church that I was a senior pastor at. And the incident was simply this. There was a lady, a young woman, she comes to me and she says, hey, Pastor Barry, I would like to do something for the church. Have you ever looked back on previous conversations and thought, you know what, if I had just been a jerk for 10 seconds and said no, I wouldn't be in my present situation. Have you ever thought that? There's a few of you know what I'm talking about. Can you help me move? Yes. You know what I'm saying? So she goes, and I said, yes, what is it that your idea is? She said, well, my husband and I, we want to provide some barbecue. We'll cook it. We'll provide it. The church provides sides. You can sell it at a fundraiser dinner, and you can give the money to this ministry in the church. And I said, that is a fantastic idea. What a very simple and easy thing to do. Nope, that is not the case. I don't know what. Guys, the rest of the church, when they found out about this, they lost their minds. And you're asking yourself, why, Pastor Barry? I don't know. I really don't. I think it has something to do that whenever anything involving food, they just went nuts. It was like feeding gremlins after midnight. They just went off there. They just went scooters. And they started having meetings. People that had nothing to do with the fundraiser are having meetings to figure out what the details should be. They're having board meetings, emergency board meetings, and voting on how they should do it. And I got all kinds of some of the nuttiest phone calls I have ever received. One lady, she calls me, she goes, well, Pastor Barry, I just need to know, how are they going to prepare the barbecue? Is it going to be chopped, or is it going to be sliced, or is it going to be pulled? Heads up, they all sounded like evil clones of Paula Deen. And after a while, these conversations, they were so surreal, like I was in an episode of The Twilight Zone, like is that guy who wakes up in a different world, and it's like, well, something's off. I got a call from another person. There was a guy, didn't even go to the church, but he was mad at me because I had asked another person to borrow his grill instead of his. Yeah, you heard right. And I said, you know what's crazy about this conversation? And he said, no, what? And I said, all the words coming out of your mouth right now. Every single one of them. You're the crazy in this conversation. Then I got another call from a lady, and she said, well, what kind of slaw are they going to serve? Some slaw just ain't fit to eat. And that's when I had to verify, you mean coleslaw? The stuff you buy at Food Line in a bucket? And that was when I snapped. I actually heard a crack inside my head. And I was like, it's not plutonium it's just coleslaw. You know those, and she was just like wondering why there would be plutonium at a church dinner, and I had to explain to her that it was just sarcasm and a joke, which is great because every joke is better when you have to explain it. But I mean, we've all been there, right? Those crucial slaw decisions, where, should we work on our living wills? No, we've got coleslaws to choose. I mean, it's just the nuttiest things. And, of course, this young couple, new to the church, new to the faith, they saw all of this drama unfold, and, of course, we never saw them again. And it was just absolutely insane. And I still think back to it every now and again, and thank God that I am in a church that gets it. You understand what is really important. And Paul was speaking to a church that got it as well. He says from the very beginning that, you're a church, you put Christ first and the things of Christ first, but I want you to get it a little bit more. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is just getting it a little bit more. Because that's what he always said. It didn't matter where they were in their maturity, their spiritual growth. It was always, I wanted you to move a little bit closer to God today than you were yesterday. Okay, and those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. And to do that, we're going to take a look at four people that he mentions in two different passages, and the qualities that he extols in talking to them, okay, and some other things as well. So, where we're going to be at is in Philippians, and we'll be in two different passages. The first one is going to be Philippians chapter 2, starting at verse 19, and then we'll go straight into chapter 4, verse 2. Notes are inside your bulletins. There's also a link in there if you want to follow us online. The notes are online as well. Let's go ahead and dive right in, okay? And I'm going to get set up here. All right, very good. So, first thing is this. He says this, if the Lord Jesus is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon. Timothy is the first of four we're going to talk about. For a visit. Then he can cheer me up by telling me how you are getting along. I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. All the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know how Timothy has proved himself. Like a son with his father, he has served me in preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you just as soon as I find out what is going to happen to me here, and I have confidence from the Lord that I myself will come to see you soon. Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus this is guy number 2, and the way that you pronounce his name is really fast, so no one knows any difference. Epaphroditus, back to you. He is true brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier. And he was your messenger to help me in my need. He was the one that actually delivered that letter and whatever physical needs to Paul. I'm sending him because he has been longing to see you, and he was very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him and also on me so that I would not have one sorrow after another. So I am all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know you will be glad to see him, and then I will not be so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve. Then he mentions 2 more people, just 2 verses. Now I appeal to Euodia and Syntyche, please, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement. Doesn't say what it is, just here's something y'all need to fix. And I ask you, my true partner, this is another person he's referring to help these 2 women. For they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. They worked along with Clement and the rest of my coworkers whose names are written in the book of life, meaning they're followers of Christ. They're not perfect, but they are followers of Christ. Okay? So from this, we're going to just kind of take a look at some of the things that he talks about and some of the important things when it comes to dying to self. And dying to self, the first thing we need to realize is this. Dying to self means having genuine concern. It means having a genuine concern. even for people that may be kind of tough to get along with. There's several verses that point to this. In verse 20, chapter 2:20, it says, I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. Then he says, I am sending him, Epaphroditus, because he has been longing to see you. He's very distressed. When you heard that he was ill, meaning I want them to know that everything is okay. And then Paul himself is an example. He says, I'm going to be doing this. I'll be sending these people to you. Then I will not be so worried about you. When I was in college, there was a girl, a very pretty girl. Not Angie. This is another. And she came up to me and she said, hey, Barry, we're all going to go see a movie. Do you want to go with us? And I said, sure. I'm a bit of a social leper. I'll take any handout I can get. And she said, great. You'll need to drive us. Now, in my own defense, sometimes I can be pretty stupid. So I took that as, oh, okay, and so I just kind of went along and drove him to the theater. And after, 4 or 5 trips, I realized, I think they're just trying to use me. And I was in the cafeteria again. She comes to me and she goes, hey, Barry, you want to go see a movie with us? And I said, yeah, that's great, but my car needs gas. And she said, oh, and walked away. And it is one of those shining examples of genuine concern. She didn't go and go, oh, we need to find someone else, or oh, let me take a collection, or oh, we'll find something else, and you can still go with us. It was just, and then off she went. And I just kind of sat there and, you just kind of how you die on the inside. And and it was just amazing to me how there was what seemed like genuine concern, and there wasn't. And the thing about genuine concern is that when we fake it, people are going to see it. A little bit longer if you're pretty, but they're going to pick it up. And we need to make sure that as we are serving others, as we really are kind of putting ourselves, and that doesn't mean that we completely sacrifice everything about ourselves. What I'm saying is that when we love others, part of dying to self, putting others a little bit ahead of us, is that we have to have that genuine concern and love for other people. And we have to make sure that we are expressing that. And genuine concern isn't just the words, it also can be truly expressed through the right actions. That's where the rubber really meets the road. Now, of course, there's a lot of needs out there. There's a lot of people we would like to help, and we even talked about this a little bit last week or in a previous teaching. And, we do for a few what we wish we could do for everyone. But that said, when we really are trying to get into that mode of just simply serving others, when we're trying to get into that mindset, for those that we do try to help, whatever there's a ministry or an individual person, we need to have genuine concern. And that is something, here's the thing, that is developed while serving. You don't wait to just kind of bolster this genuine concern and then you start. It is something that you develop as you serve, as you try to put others ahead of you, as you go through those actions that a follower of Christ goes through. Does that make sense? Because we don't want to use, well, I don't really love anyone. You don't want to use that as an excuse for not doing anything. Love is developed. It's a muscle that you have to flex, that you have to develop. It's a skill that builds over time, just like any other, okay? But it is something that we must strive for. The other thing is this. Dying to self means putting matters of Christ first. Matters of Christ come first. In chapter 2, verse 22, he says, and this is Timothy, he says that he is like a son with his father. He has served me in preaching the good news. And then when he mentions the 2 ladies in chapter 4, he says that they also had been helping preach the good news. Okay? And that is one of those things that must come first. This was something that, again, I discussed in that first teaching. And so I don't want to elaborate on this here, but you have to realize that other things are going to be put down the totem pole as we put matters of Christ first. There was a gentleman and his wife. They'd been praying about where they should move. And they prayed that prayer in the sense of having God use them, reaching out to the people around them and that sort of thing. And so they felt like God was calling them to a certain neighborhood, and so that's where they went. They were very obedient. This person, both of them were very financially savvy. They knew that, they want to, when you buy a home, you want it to be a good investment. And they couldn't help but notice that as time went by, the asset, the cost of their house, the value of their home actually began to decline. And, they're starting to fret, and one day we'll have to sell this and we're going to take a loss. And, Lord, I thought you called us to this neighborhood. And God just kind of impressed upon them, yeah, I did. To witness to the neighbors in that neighborhood, not to make a financial gain. And in our society and in that Americanized, dream to just do what it is that God, to just make for ourselves and to make a way, that's a very hard pill to swallow, but that's what God called them to do. He didn't care about their financial state. He didn't care about their portfolio nearly as much as witnessing to those in that neighborhood. And when they realized that, their mindset, they said, we understand. And they just kind of knew that that's something that was a very real possibility. But they continued to serve. So one of the things, and there's so many different things, there's so many things out there that society tells us is more important, or that we feel is more important, or we just get wrapped up in ourselves and we just wonder, what about me? What about me? And over again, you're going to be finding things, little things that just creep in that you're going to have to take and just kind of set on the back burner. You don't ignore it. You don't sweep it under a carpet. But you realize that if something goes against our ability to put the matters of Christ first, if something gets in the way, it's going to need to take a step aside. And that's hard for some of us to hear. But as we continue to do that, you'll see little things. We're actually going to talk about some of those sacrifices in just a moment. But realize that the matters of Christ, they do come first. Because those matters are permanent matters. None of our homes are permanent. They're all temporary. All the stuff, all the things, all the glitz and the gold, all that kind of stuff, it's so very temporary and so very shallow. Matters of Christ, they must come first. Okay? And this kind of flows into the next point, which is this. Dying to self means sacrificial service. It means sacrificial service. So in verse 22, we read about Epaphroditus and how he was very ill, almost to the point of dying. And we don't know my guess is this happens because the other church, he wasn't there. And somehow his trip may have contributed to the illness. He may have been able to not get sick if he had stayed with the church in Philippi. We're not entirely sure. But we do realize that sometimes service is incredibly inconvenient. And it is something that we really need to remind ourselves on a regular basis, that as we do the things that God has called us to do, in keeping with our skills, with our talents, our personality, all that kind of stuff, there's still going to be some hiccups. There's going to be some obstacles. There's a young man who used to play bass up here on stage, and he went to Pastor Jose and he said, you know what, I just need to quit. And he said, really, why? What's going on? And he said, when I'm up here, I'm not getting fed. I can't really worship when I'm leading the worship for others. And he says, it feels like work. And Pastor Jose said, yeah, that's because it is. Good eye. You're focusing on doing something. You're putting effort into something, and it's going to be difficult. And you have to, and you'll realize that, first of all, serving is in itself a form of worship, not just singing along to happy songs, but actually serving others and doing what God has called us to do. But you're going to have to find that time of worship outside of this work. And as Jose talked to him and he kind of explained things and kind of talked about that mindset, he got it. He was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then he continued to play. But we've got to realize that there's going to be times where it is really very, 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 very difficult. And it's difficult even in finding that place to serve. Many of the people that we talk to, either in the step class, or they'll approach us, or email us, or all of the way, just all the ways that we just kind of come in contact with people, and they just, I don't know what I should do. I don't know what I should be doing. I don't know how to serve, and God won't tell me. And I'm just like, well, yeah, he's probably not going to. We got a few surveys that you can go through, but here's the thing. You learn, and this isn't just when it comes to serving others. This is in your professional life. This is in every mode of life. You discover what you're good at by doing it. You discover who you really are and how you're really shaped in practice, not in theory. If you had gone to when I was in high school, if you had gone to any of my friends or any of my teachers or either of my parents and said, he's going to be a pastor one day, they would have laughed in your face. Yeah, he's going to get up in front of people and speak. Have you met Mary? It was just the craziest thing. And it wasn't until God called me to this and I started stepping into things that I realized that this really was the calling that he had for me. And even as I took on the full-time ministry, even within the realm of full-time ministry and just being a pastor, I tried one thing, I wasn't very good at it. Tried another, I wasn't good at that either. That last church that I told you about, I got there, it was about 110 people there. I grew it to 50. Lead pastor, not my thing. And so, and it wasn't until I came here that I started to kind of find my niche. And that's okay. You find out who you are and how God has shaped you by doing. And that's inconvenient, but guess what? There's a lot of very inconvenient people out there who need to know about Jesus Christ. There's a lot of people out there that need to know. And some of them are more difficult to deal with than others. And that takes us to the last point that I want to share with you this morning. Dying to self means setting aside personal differences. It means setting aside personal differences. In chapter 4, got to put that up there, sorry guys. In chapter 4, he says, "Now appeal to Euodia and Syntyche, please, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement." Is it just me? When two guys don't like each other, they just walk away from each other. They just don't talk to each other. They just kind of like, me no like, and we just kind of drag our knuckles in the opposite direction. Two women may not like each other, but they'll still hang out. Am I wrong? That's so weird. Why do you do that? And you'll just make these little these little comments every day. That dress used to fit, those kind of little things. Just, I don't get it. And these two women had been together, and obviously the disagreement had gotten to the point that other people had noticed, and he just felt like he needed to say something. And, this is just this idea that this has got to end. And one of the biggest things, and there's so much I could say about this, but one of the things that we have to do is, first of all, we have to realize that a lot of these disagreements really are they come from a development of miscommunication. I'm going to set this down for a minute. There was it's so hard to talk with my hands when I got this. There was a situation where somebody called me, and she said, so-and-so, he said this, and now I'm really mad. And she told me what he had said. And by this point, I had known the person for about 6 years. And I thought, that does not at all sound like something he would say. And I said, I think he was joking, or maybe you misunderstood. Oh, no, he wasn't, and no, I did not. And I said, how long have you known this person? And she said, I've known him for 20 years. Yeah. And I said, have you ever heard him say anything like that before? And she said, nope. And I said, well, then maybe you may have, out of 2 decades, he's never said anything like that. Do you think maybe you misunderstood what he was saying? And she was like, oh, maybe. And then it started to click that maybe there was just this simple misunderstanding. And it's insane to me how quickly we react to things. And a lot of times, and here's the thing, and there's some sort of mental bias that has a fancy name, I forget what it's called, but it's the idea that whenever we receive something that we don't like, it's the idea that that person did it intentionally, when 95% of the time they were just texting us while they were trying to drive and not crash, or they woke up in a crappy mood and it got transferred, or they just didn't develop the sentence enough, or whatever, and it was just a very simple thing. And we need to give people the benefit of the doubt. What was their intention? Maybe they were just hangry. Why did they say that? And the other thing is this. We also need to realize that there's going to be people that are offensive, and yet, as Christians, we still need to be willing to let things go. One of my, this really shouldn't be a favorite story, but it is. There was one of our First Impressions team, this was many years ago. He was out, this is when we were still meeting in the tent building, and he was greeting people as they came in, and a lady came up, and he said, hey, welcome to Spout Springs Church, and he put out his hand, and she looked at his hand and said, I'll pass. Walked around him and went inside. He did not club her to death. That was amazing. And he came to me later, and he said, can you believe that? And I said, unfortunately, I can. This was a woman who was in her later years. She had arthritis. She had kind of a phobia about germs and that sort of thing. All of it, she could have just said, I don't shake hands, fist bump, but no, she had to say something snarky. And I said, the thing about it is that hurting people hurt others and are easily hurt by them. And as I got to know her story, this was a woman who just had a very long, protracted history of pain. And as I was able to explain things, he was able to calm down a little bit. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. When two people have a disagreement, the one who is the more spiritually mature is going to make the bigger sacrifice. The one who is the more spiritually mature is going to make the bigger sacrifice. And we have to, not only when it comes to how we receive these things, but how we express them as well, that we need to be careful. We need to, as Christians, not be easily offended and not easily offend. I don't always do that second part real well. There are times where I'm just like, my brain will just, hey, this might be funny, and then just throws it out there. You've all heard about Hurricane Barry? Yeah. That was a very odd reaction. Not even sure where to go from here. But I wanted so desperately to just put on Facebook, guys, I'm really conflicted about this because I don't want to hear Barry responsible for millions in damage, but I also don't want to hear Barry fizzles out before he even hits the shoreline. And I wanted to post that so badly. But that would have been a little awkward had it just, destroyed, and hurt so many people. So I just had to, and just kind of, no, and just kind of just lay it aside. You can say it in church. And so we have to just be mindful of others. We have to be mindful of the things that we say. We have to be, which is a hilarious thing for me to be saying that, but we really do. And it really is about, a lot of times when these things do happen, just laying aside those personal differences and just kind of getting over ourselves a little bit, okay? And that's what dying to self really is, because we kind of get this, well, I deserve to be angry, or I deserve to be offended. You know what happens to a person physically when they're offended? Nothing. No one has ever said, oh, he offended me. I think I need an MRI. You're fine. And you just need to let some of these things go. And it really does mean just kind of rising above the situation and getting a bigger perspective, okay? Set aside those personal differences, because if we're going to die to self, that means sometimes making the bigger sacrifice, okay? In closing, and this is, let's see if I can pull this up real quick. He says, in talking about these guys, he says this. No, he didn't say that. There we go. In verse 29, he says, welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve. You know, and obviously, you know, we don't do this so that we can be lauded and praised and that sort of thing. But there is this story where the man who owns something and he leaves it in charge, the talents, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And I want very much to hear that. I want to be somebody, you know, because it's really, you know, human praise, while we all want it, and I think we all should seek it, in the very least, and the idea that we should also be willing to give it in just terms of encouragement and building one another up. Real praise, real honor comes from God himself. And I want so very much to know that I'm doing the things that God has called me to do. And that just means constantly striving to make sure, in the way that Scripture prescribes, that I'm setting myself back and putting others ahead. And this is something that will constantly, and this is the real sticky part of it, is that we are constantly drifting away from that. It's almost like when you go to the beach and you're out in the water and you look up and your hotel room has all of a sudden, it's all the way down there because the current has just been constantly, gradually, very slowly pulling you in an opposite direction. I really think that church that I mentioned at the beginning, there were people there that did get it. The problem is that the people who didn't get it were the ones who were put in charge. And about 4 or 5 months ago, that church, they closed its doors. I want to be real honest with you. That's okay, because they weren't a church. Church was on the sign out front, but they weren't really a church. And when they disappeared, no one noticed. It wasn't like, oh no, they're gone. Now what will we do? Who will help us now? Because helping wasn't really big on their agenda. We need to make sure that drift is something that, and let me be real honest with this too, because I don't want to try to put out this idea that we're a church that gets it and no one else does. That's not what I'm saying. There's so many churches that do, and there's a lot of churches that don't. And every church is in that current. Every family, every individual, they're in that current of just, more focused on me until we realize that we've kind of let some things get in the way and we have to reorient ourselves and refocus. And so, like I said at the beginning, and like Paul says at the beginning of this book, you get it, guys. You are on track. You're spreading the gospel. You're loving others. But I want you to get it a little bit more. And so my challenge to you this morning is simply this. When it comes to dying to self, when it comes to these different things, is there a drift that I need to pay attention to? Is there an area where I've kind of slid away and get reoriented? In closing, we always take time to tell you a little bit about our Blue Bag ministry. We have some at each corner of the stage, and we have some on the back. And if any of you pick up one of these, basically you're saying, you know what, I'm ready to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And also, if you're wanting to get baptized, you can come along and pick one of these up too. But if you do, somebody will come along, they'll unpack this with you, and they'll explain in very simple terms what it means to be a follower of Christ. Also, we have our communion stations, one in the back, one in the front. If you want to take part in communion, we also have the cross right over here if you want to spend some time in prayer. And I don't mention these guys nearly enough. We also got some people on the sides who, if you want to, you can approach them. They're not going to approach you. They will pray with you. You just ask, and they'll pray with you. Okay? But dying to self, it's not something that we naturally gravitate towards. And yet, Christ told us that is what we must do. That is how the kingdom of God is spread. It's by taking all of these things, these temporary things, these peripherals, these things that are just so shallow, and really focusing on those things that truly matter. And I can guarantee you, as I've been going through this, I've been learning a lot and reminding, just in terms of reminding myself. It isn't so much that we need to be taught certain things as much as we just need to be reminded that Christ comes first, and we have to do that, and we have to remind ourselves of that on a regular basis. And so that's my challenge. Spend some time in prayer, because this is really between you and God. Prayerfully ask, is there an area of drift where I need to reorient myself and put you first?